hello everyone, my name is Tony Nelson. I am a sales engineer here at TerraSky, and we're going to be covering the TerraSky's approach to overhauling the Salesforce UI. And we'll talk through the various ways we can do that. But I basically handle all of the technical aspects of working with our customers and evangelizing our product and things like that at the company. And with me, I have Jeremy Hepikoski, who handles a lot of the business side of things at TerraSky. So if you have questions around partnership agreements or contracts of any kind of pricing, he's the guy to talk to about that. I handle a lot more of, does the product do XYZ thing? Can I do this? Can I do that? So our contact information is on the screen. If you feel like emailing us any of those questions, we're happy to talk and help out with any of that stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into the agenda for today. We are going to be doing a couple of things, the first of which is going to be our updated Spice announcement. So for those of you who were with us at Dreamforce, you heard about the Spice platform that we're launching in the next couple of months. I'm going to briefly talk about that, and then we're going to dive right into the actual demo of Sky Visual Editor and how we're going to completely overhaul the account layout utilizing custom UIs instead of the basic Salesforce interface. And then we'll leave about 10 minutes or so open for Q&A. So again, if you have questions throughout, just put them inside of the question panel and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So let's talk about Spice real quick. So for those of you who are not at Dreamforce or who have no idea what I'm talking about, Spice is a new platform that TerraSky is creating to help create Lightning components. So the new Lightning experience is a really cool concept. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of stuff on the component marketplace to really utilize Lightning effectively, except for the basic stuff that Salesforce has created out of the box. So there's not really a great way of customizing it unless you have a staff of developers who can do that yourself. So we've been partnering with Salesforce to ensure that we can create something that provides users and admins with a drag and drop method of creating Lightning components so they can create the business logic and the really cool and nifty things that need to be done inside of Lightning without having to understand the entire new framework aura and how events fire and work and all that stuff. So as you can see, here's a screenshot of the alpha test that we showed at Dreamforce and let people play with. All the components are going to be on the left. You drag and drop them onto the canvas. You can create interactions between components and are able to utilize them in that drag and drop capacity. So what we'll go ahead and do is switch over to the demo and start working with Sky Visual Editor. So let me exit out of this and jump into the Sky Visual Editor platform. All right, so what we're looking at here is what we call the account page inside of our environment. Now this account page is obviously not the same thing as what you look at whenever you're inside of Salesforce Classic. So we're going to recreate this page and all of the functionality that goes into it. The one piece that we're not going to recreate is the cosmetic look of it. So if you notice, there's like blue headers and there's blue bars and it's got this gray color tone to it. And that's because I've taken the TerraSky website CSS and I've applied it directly into the Visualforce page to provide some kind of color theme that looks and operates similar to the TerraSky colors, just for branding purposes. So since that's custom code, I'm not going to show that. But everything else in terms of the 4 columns across the top, interior tabs, we've got search functionality on the related list, and a details panel that pops up on the right-hand side. All of this stuff we will recreate very quickly, and I'll show you how to create some really cool combinations in terms of functional enhancements that you can do. So the big thing to understand about the details panel, because this is one that probably people on the webinar haven't seen or have not used before, the concept behind this is that the console side of Salesforce is really cool, but it's just for Sales Console, just for Service Console. So we wanted to make something that was similar but not really competitive to what they do for the entire platform. So in this particular case, it only works for related lists that are available on your page. And in my case, I clicked a details button next to Chad Pratt, and I have a custom page on the right-hand side that opens up that I can interact with in some way. So you have full control over what that custom page is going to look like and how it's going to operate, and we'll walk through how to create these combinations. Now, to show you what I mean by full control over this, the current contact one is just a data entry place in case you don't have enough fields here. Our related list you can inline edit, so being able to just quickly change and modify any of those 5 columns is great. But if you need something outside of that, instead of opening up a new window, you can just open this details panel and modify the information here. You can save it and then close out that window, and you never had to leave the page. But what I'm going to show you is, since we get to control what goes there, if I switch over to Opportunity, I also have a Details button here. And when I click on the Details button for the opportunity, it changes completely. So instead of just a data entry page, what I have for opportunities are an actual document that we have generated for a sales order form, and we have fields that are overlaid on top of it, and it's rendered as a PDF. So instead of opening up the opportunity record and then going into a quote and then viewing the quote, or several steps in like that, I can just click a details button and have it appear on the right-hand side for quick and easy access. So this is great for anybody that's working with different kinds of departments, or they're working within customers, or if you're on Salesforce communities, being able to provide some of this functional enhancement. The whole goal of this is to allow users to interact with Salesforce in a very streamlined way. So I've got about 13 minutes left, so I'm going to dive right into the tool. And as I mentioned, this is going to be moving at a bit faster of a pace. So if this is your first time seeing Sky Visual Editor, the basics of what it does is it will help us create these really customized pages, and I'm going to do everything in drag and drop. But you're not going to have enough time to follow along as you're just beginning to learn the platform. So wait for the recording to come out, and then you can follow along during that time. So what you would do is go to skyvisualeditor.com, create a Design Studio login, and then actually connect into your organization and log in. Now, since I'm going to remake this entire UI for the account, I'm going to have to start with the details panels if I want to create those in the most optimized way. So I'm going to create the custom page for the contact, and then I'm going to come in and create the account, just to kind of give you an order to follow. Now this is something it's a very impromptu demo of the platform, so if it doesn't come out looking exactly like the other page, that's because I'm winging it, but I do want to show the general concept of how to do this. So in order to create that custom contact page, I'm going to go to File, click Load Page Layout. You're going to select the object that you'd like to work with. So in here I'll just filter for contact and choose that. It's going to load in the different record types that exist for your contact object, and you select the one that you want to use as a starting point. We don't override this page when it gets deployed into Salesforce unless you want it to. It just kind of exists in limbo. So here what I want to do is I want to consolidate and create a compact view of this page so that when it's on the right-hand panel of the screen, it's really simple for the user to navigate without much scrolling. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to the component palette on the left-hand side. And by the way, all of the fields and components are all on the left. Properties are all on the right-hand side. So components are on the left. I'm going to grab what we call a tab panel, and I'm going to put it at the top of the page. And inside of this tab number 1, I'm going to rename the title on the right. We'll call this my contact information. And the idea here is that I'm going to put this entire block of fields for contact information right inside of that panel so that we can work with it. So I'm going to drag on a page block, place it inside, and then put the contact information right inside of that. Now if you notice, component 223 doesn't make much sense, so on the right-hand side I'm just going to remove that title and then hide some of the buttons. And there we go. We now have all that contact information inside of a tab. We'll do the same thing, rinse and repeat for the next 2 sections. So I'll call this the address information. Hopefully I spelled that right. There we go. And then drag the page block in there, and then the page block section goes right inside of that. Again, remove component 224 because that doesn't make sense to end users, and then just hide that. And then tab number 3, I basically want everything else. So I'll just call this my additional information section. So additional information is the title. And drag another page block in. And this time I'm going to grab the additional information page block section and then the description information section. There we go. I'm going to remove the title of this component because 225 doesn't make sense, and hide the buttons. Now if you notice, I've got a cancel button here. I don't need that since it's in a panel, so I'm just going to remove that cancel button. Additionally, I don't need all of these related lists that are at the bottom, so I can start stripping out all of these custom related lists that are at the bottom or anything else that's unnecessary. So I'm just removing opportunities, any quotes that I have. Let's see, these pre-applications, remove all those. Activity history, I don't want users creating that inside of the panel, so I can just remove everything down here. And there we go. So now we've come up with a fairly basic and rudimentary way of working with the contact. Again, I purely want users interacting with the fields, so I don't need all of that related information. If you want to have that stuff in the side panel, that's perfectly fine, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I don't want that. Now, if we notice on the right-hand side, I've switched over to the Page tab. I'm going to give this a different name. So it currently has a name of SVE underscore and a big date timestamp. So I'm going to change this to October webinar, we'll say contact page. There we go. Now that I've done this, let's go ahead and click File, Deploy. We're going to tell it whether it's a sandbox or production environment and go ahead and send that into Salesforce. Now what takes place here is that we're going to take the entire layout that I've created and it's going to begin converting this into Visualforce code and Apex extensions and deploy them right into Salesforce. So if you're familiar with how that stuff operates, you can go in there and look at that at your own spare time. You can look at the raw code. You do have access to it if you want to tinker and modify it. I don't recommend it, but you could. And we can work with it that way. So here's that, just a quick example of how that page looks inside of Salesforce. Here's the page that we made in just a couple of moments. So it's got the tabs there and the Save button at the top. There we go. So now what I need to do is I need to create the account page. To do this, I go to File, Load Page Layout, and this time I'm going to choose the account page. Now that I've done this, again, I select the record type and click Open. Now the big thing to remember about this page is that I'm going to reference the page that we just created, the contact page, which is why I wanted to create that one first so I could reference it. So the changes I'm going to make here are the first section across the top, the account information. I need to increase that to a 4-column view. So on the right-hand side, I simply change the column count to a 4 instead of a 2, and I can begin dragging things from left to right and putting them in place wherever you need them. And the same thing can be done for any of these sections, but I'm only going to do it for this top one for the sake of time. Now that we have this in place, you can change colors. You can do pretty much whatever you'd like with these components. What I'm going to do for this next section is on the component palette, I'm going to place in another tab panel. And the reason for this is that's what we have here. We have our related list and billing and shipping information inside of tabs. So I'm going to reproduce that. So tab number 1 was the contact data. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this my contact data right there. And then I scroll down to the bottom and I retrieve that contact related list. I can scroll up and then drop it right inside of that tab. And there we go. Now since Sky Visual Editor does not override any of your validation rules and workflow rules and permission sets that are in place for profiles, you do have to have all the required fields in order to create contact records. And what I mean by that is we give you the capability of creating records across multiple objects. So this means while you're creating an account, you can also create contacts and opportunities and tasks all in a single screen as long as the required fields are there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove full name and I'm going to insert a second column for first and last name instead. And in here, I choose from this related list the contact. And I'm just going to search for name and drag the first name onto the page and the last name onto the page. Now that I've done this, the required fields are on that section. I can go ahead and create these if I want. Now for the sake of today's demo, if we look over here again, notice we have a details panel but no add, no delete functionality, and I have the filter at the top. So in order to reproduce that, the default state of our what we call data tables are such that you can add rows inline because it's a really helpful piece of functionality, but I don't want it for today. So I'm going to uncheck the add row functional box on the right hand side. Just uncheck that and that goes away. And then for the client side filter, that little search box across the top, I can just check that. And if you notice above first name, we now have that box. And if you're wondering what that does, well, here's what it does. I can type in VP as an example, and it will search through that related list and show us only the content that has that information inside of it. And it'll search any columns that are displayed on the page. So this means that I can search for dates as an example. So I can search like 7/10, and it'll filter out anything that doesn't have 7/10 in one of the columns somewhere. Okay, so that's kind of what that dynamic searching does. That's really, really helpful if you have related lists with lots of pagination in place. Very helpful for finding records. Okay, so the second part here, we're going to add in the opportunities. So real quick, I'll call this my opportunity data. scroll down to the bottom again, grab that opportunity section, and then just drop it in place. Tab number 3, what I'm going to do is add in the address information. So I can just take this title, call this the address information, and then we will need to drop a page block inside of the tab because page block sections must exist inside of page blocks. And now we can move it inside of there. Again, component 187 doesn't make sense, so I'm just going to remove that and then hide the button bar. Okay, so now that this is in place, the next thing that we need to do is we need to give the user the ability to work with that details panel. And if you're wondering what that was, this is the details panel. It opens up that right-hand pane, and you can work with the custom page over on the right-hand side. So in order to recreate that, we go down to the details panel, which is the last component before the app component section, and we drag it either to the right or to the bottom of the page, either one depending on where you want the panel. I prefer the right, so that's where we're going to do it. Now if you notice there's this large blue/purple bar that's appeared along the right-hand side, go ahead and click that, and there's a property that's called width. This is going to be the default width of that section when you initially click the details button. You can override the size and resize it as you'd like, but this is the default size whenever we first start working with it. Now that we've set the default size, I can go ahead and add in the iframe setting. So the iframe setting simply means that we're going to reference a page for one of these related lists. So we made one for the contact. I'm going to call this, let's see, what do we call this? The SVE October Webinar Contact page. There we go. So I select that page and it will now be associated with the contact. So I go ahead and click OK. And if I look back over here, the contact next to first name now has a details button. Since I did not assign one for the opportunity, if you notice next to the name on the opportunity, it still shows the add and delete, not a details button. So it only appears for the ones that you actually assign pages to reference. Now that we have this in place, one of the things that we want to do is make sure that the page is display only. So again, the page on the left-hand side over here, everything is display only, and it's meant to be worked with in that capacity. The fields that I currently have on the page are editable fields, and you can tell this because a display-only field, if I add one of these, we'll say assistant phone. Let's go over here and add on, let's say, account name. If I add account name, when it's display only, it doesn't look like an input field. It actually has the name of the field in place, whereas the account name input field looks like where you'd actually type. So we need to convert this entire section to a display-only page so that we can reproduce that other page's functionality. To do this, since we've already made the layout and the structure, and we just did everything in input fields, that's perfectly fine. We can go to Tools, click Convert. It's going to tell us we're going to give you this new page name, so I'm going to call this my October Webinar Account page, and go ahead and click OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to take all of the fields and convert them from input fields to output fields, and it's going to take my Save button and turn it into an Edit and a Delete button instead. So there we go. We now have all that functionality in place. One other thing that you may miss about Lightning Experience or about the default page layouts or inline editing. So don't fear about that. On the right-hand side, there's a page property. You can simply toggle the Enable Inline Editing, and there you go. We now have that functionality. Okay, so we're done making changes to the page. What we can do is then go to File, click Deploy. Again, tell it whether sandbox or production, and off it goes. We're going to go ahead and generate that page and all of the references and functionality for you, and we've just created 2 full Visualforce pages in about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do to show this in action is, since I'm not going to assign the page anywhere for the sake of time, I am just going to grab this record ID so I can show you what a record in this page actually looks like. So if you notice when I open this up, there's going to be no information, and that's because there's nothing that it's referencing. So at the top, I'm simply going to add in everything here and then click Enter. All right, so here we go. We have the entire page that we just created, 4 columns across the top. We have the interior tabs. You have the ability to search for Edna as an example, and it would go through, if I actually type that correctly, Edna, and there we go. So there's the Edna Frank. We've got the filters in place, and then the details panel. So I can click on the details panel for, let's say, Chad Pratt, and on the right-hand side it would appear with that custom page that we had just created. So there's the tab panels across the top that we had, and there's all the information. But if you notice, none of the related lists are down at the bottom. And again, this is just because we want to create that functional experience that that we had desired. So you can create pretty much whatever you'd like as long as you can imagine it. You have full access to create that. Now, for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and stop here and open it up for Q&A. The one thing I have to mention is that the recorded webinar will not include any Q&A in it because we talk about things that are safe harbored, and we may get into other discussions that we just don't want to have public facing yet. So feel free to ask any questions that you like, and we'll make sure to address those at this time. If you're a developer, you may be looking at this and saying, wow, this looks like it's, you know, a threat to what I do. The idea behind the Sky Visual Editor platform is that we want to enhance the way developers and administrators create pages, so they're not spending time working on the design aspect of Salesforce. They can spend it working on the back end functional enhancements that need to take place for the business. So that's really where the idea behind Sky Visual Editor came from, was not to offset developers, but simply to help expedite the work so they can get to the important things. The other thing I should point out is I didn't touch anything for custom code. So if you want to dive into custom code, we do have sections for that, and you can get into any custom Apex extensions and JavaScript and Visualforce code, add it all in here to your heart's content. But if you notice, everything I did was drag and drop, and if you want to get into the custom code, it's off to the right-hand side under these property sections, where you can actually get in and jump into an editor and add in your own custom code. All right, so let's go ahead and open this up for Q&A, and I'll make sure to answer as many of these questions as possible. So let's see.